Good morning and welcome to Fox 29's News Now on this Wednesday morning. We're going to get started with some local news for you. An Amber Alert has been issued in the case of a missing 5-year-old girl from South Jersey. Investigators are now saying the child was lured into a stranger's van. Fox 29's Steve Keeley filed this report.
No matter what languages you speak, you don't need a translator to understand the grandmother of 5-year-old Dulce Maria Alvarez and her pain. Asked if the little girl could somehow see this now, what message would you like to say? Tell her I love her and I miss her. She has always been so sweet, the sweetest, loveliest little girl ever. The Amber Alert comes after more interviews with more people who were in Bridgeton City Park Monday afternoon, the police chief says. And so much more searching turned up no sign of the 5-year-old girl. Put out 30 hours after she went missing at 10:05 p.m. last night. Now believing she was taken by a man driving a red van at 4:20 p.m. on Monday. The description of the van, red with passenger side sliding door and tinted windows. The man, light-skinned, maybe Hispanic, 5'6" to 5'8", with acne, no facial hair, wearing orange sneakers, red pants, and black shirt. We spoke to Dulce Maria Alvarez's mother, who took her daughter, 3-year-old son, and 8-year-old relative to a convenience store to get ice cream just minutes before, which is where police got these surveillance pictures from, to show what the little girl was wearing when she vanished.
I asked my son, where's your sister? He can't talk still. He just pointed towards the buildings. That's when me and my sister started worrying about her. I asked people and knew nothing about her. No one saw her because there was barely people here at the park. It was just us and people on the basketball court.
And so as more hours pass and no sign of the little girl yet, there is at least now a sign of hope. Yesterday they were draining local waterways expecting to find her body. Now they still hope to find her alive.
No, la verdad no sé.
She ended our interview with this message to the kidnapper. Whoever has her, give her back. She doesn't deserve this. She's innocent. In Bridgeton, Steve Keeley, Fox 29 News.
And developing out of Philadelphia's Overbrook neighborhood, a horrific crime after police say a mother was shot and killed next to her 6-month-old son. Fox 29's Lauren Johnson filed this report.
Yeah, good morning. This morning, the police commissioner tells us waking up to see that helpless, motherless child in the arms of one of her officers was simply heartbreaking. And now detectives here at police headquarters are trying to figure out who is responsible for leaving this 6-month-old baby boy covered in his mother's blood. Police believe it's a domestic situation, but they haven't confirmed that just yet. They were called to the 5400 block of Stewart Street around 8 p.m. last night. People who were living inside that rooming house told police that it was upstairs in a back bedroom where it all happened. In the hallway, they found a shell casing from a semi-automatic weapon inside that room. On the floor, a 28-year-old mom with a gunshot to her face, right near her mouth, fighting for her life. On the bed nearby, her baby boy covered in her blood.
All crime is tragic, but those ones that, it just makes you feel like I just happened to look at the picture this morning of the officer or sergeant holding the child, and you just put yourself in that place because most of our cops are parents, their mothers, their fathers, and stuff like that, and it's just sickening to know that people will victimize our most vulnerable.
The baby was not harmed, taken to CHOP for evaluation. Police expect the child to be handed over to family. As for that mother, she was rushed to Lincoln Medical Center. She did not survive her injuries. Witnesses did tell police they heard an argument with a man just moments before hearing a single gunshot and footsteps down those stairs. They also say that mother and that young child had just moved into that rooming house just 10 short days ago.
And moving on to your Fox 29 weather this morning. The Philadelphia area is slated for a mostly sunny Wednesday with some cool and comfortable conditions. Temperatures will reach a high of around 73 degrees, so pretty cool and definitely a taste of fall for us this Wednesday. The forecast is expected to stay dry for the next several days with mostly sunny conditions. Here we have a look at current temperatures in our area. A pretty chilly 56 degrees up in the Poconos, hitting around the mid-60 mark in Lancaster, PA, and around the same 68 degrees here in Philadelphia, and pretty chilly down the shore as well, 66 degrees in Wildwood and 68 degrees in Atlantic City. And looking ahead to our 7-day forecast, again, it's going to be a nice sunny day, very fall-like this Wednesday, and that nice stretch of weather will continue all the way through the weekend. We will see an increase in temperatures as we approach Saturday and Sunday with temperatures in the mid-80s, but for right now we are experiencing a pretty pleasant fall-like temperature of the mid-70s and sunny conditions. And we are going to take you over to Washington now, where Democrats are speaking outside their weekly caucus meeting. Stay with us.
From economic growth, national security, regulatory reform. It's a long list of very real deliverables for the American people that we've seen from President Trump and from the Republicans. And then we came back to D.C., and we see the continued obsession with impeachment by the House Democrats. They've been flailing around for a reason to impeach, I'd say blatantly trampling on the Constitution and doing that, and flailing around for a target. And we all saw that this last few days with what the New York Times did to Justice Kavanaugh, yet one more time.
And excuse us, it appears that we are outside of the Republican caucus meeting. Stay with us.
And you know, obviously was just an absolute continued attack on him that they ought to be ashamed of. And now, immediately after that came out, you had the Democratic candidates for president. Many of them announced that we ought to impeach Justice Kavanaugh. We're going to continue to stand for the Constitution. We're going to continue to stand for the rule of law, and we're going to continue to stand for making progress for the American people. And we are really thrilled this morning to have with us a member of the Judiciary Committee, one of our freshman members, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Reschenthaler, who's going to talk about what's happening in Judiciary.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Chairwoman. Good morning. It's great to be here today. Just want to give some updates on the House Judiciary Committee. You know, in the Navy, we had a saying, and that was bluff, bottom line up front. Well, the bottom line up front here is that congressional Democrats have been trying to undo the 2016 election since the moment this president was elected. They've promised their radical base that they would impeach the president come hell or high water. Evidence be damned. Impeachment. There's just one problem with that. The full House must vote on the floor with a simple majority to authorize official impeachment proceedings. But the Democrats, the party of impeachment, lacks the votes to do that. The Democrats lack the votes because their caucus is severely torn. Their senior leaders are against impeachment, but their rank and file are rabid over the idea. They've held three separate votes to initiate impeachment proceedings, and all of them have failed. But the party of impeachment just charges on. They really want to have it both ways. And enter their hero, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler. Last week, Democrats on the committee, led by Jerry Nadler, kicked off their faux impeachment by bringing up a vote on a meaningless resolution which does nothing new. It was a resolution that barely was an inquiry on whether or not to have an inquiry. It was meaningless. It should be an embarrassment to the Democrat Party. But yesterday, the Democrats went on the same path, the party of impeachment. Yesterday, the committee Democrats brought in Corey Lewandowski. Lewandowski has already voluntarily testified 3 separate times. He testified before the House Intel Committee, the Senate Intel Committee, and before the special counsel. There was nothing new to be gained, This was a gigantic waste of time and a waste of government resources. You know, the special counsel report should have been the end of this. Robert Mueller's testimony should have been the end of this. But the party of impeachment, they can't help themselves. Now, whether they called this charade an impeachment inquiry, an impeachment investigation, an impeachment probe, or an impeachment proceeding, or whether they just totally ignore the whole issue like Nancy Pelosi did last week, the bottom line is the same. Congressional Democrats are trying to have their cake and eat it too when it comes to impeachment. Now, unfortunately, the loser here is the American people. The American people would prefer that we fix our broken immigration system, secure our southern border. The American people would prefer that we work to lower the cost of prescription drugs. The American people, I'm sure, would prefer that we have a bill that would stop Russia from interfering in our elections. Yet the party of impeachment would rather use Russia's bad behavior to harass this president. House Republicans, on the other hand, are willing to continue to work for the American people. House Republicans will continue fighting for secure borders, will continue to fight to make sure China stops their unfair trade practices, and will continue to fight for the safety of America. But the party of impeachment might be willing to continue to play political games. House Republicans are ready to work for everyday Americans. Thank you, and with that, I hand it over to Whip Scalise.
Thank you, Guy, and great work on the committee to continue to hold the committee itself accountable for their job. I mean, it's just bizarre to see this massive drumbeat towards impeachment by Chairman Nadler. And one of the most irresponsible things I've ever seen in Congress last week, you had the chairman of a major committee in Congress say that he hopes to bring articles of impeachment to the floor of the House by the end of this year, and there are absolutely no grounds for impeachment. The idea that he's got an article of impeachment already drafted up with just blanks waiting to be filled in, and he's on a fishing expedition using his committee, abusing the power of that committee to try to find something. And he's stated his objective is to try to impeach the president, even though there still is no basis for impeachment, and they themselves acknowledge that. I asked Majority Leader Hoyer in our colloquy last week, I said, what are the actual articles of impeachment that your chairman hopes to bring to the House floor by the end of this year? And he couldn't name one. And yet he's still allowing the chairman of the committee to meander around and abuse the power of that committee to try to harass and hound the president and friends of the president, former associates of the president, with no basis at all. And then, of course, over the weekend, you saw the New York Times try to do yet another hit piece on Justice Kavanaugh. And before the article was even filed, you had presidential candidates on the Democrat side calling for the impeachment of a sitting Supreme Court justice. And then quickly, before the article could even, the ink could dry on the pages of the New York Times, you saw them walking it back. What accountability will be held to the editors who allowed such an irresponsible article to be written? Again, the American people are watching this in disgust, wondering why the Democrats got this majority and are wasting it away. Instead of bringing something really important for the people of this country, the workers of this country, like USMCA, which could be law of the land. We could have over 100,000 new jobs in America with better trade deals with our southern and northern neighbors in Canada and Mexico. That could be law today. But Pelosi won't bring that to the floor because she's spending so much time on impeachment and enabling this fantasy that they have that's completely baseless. And so in the meantime, we're going to continue doing our job, promoting alternatives, building a coalition. I had a good meeting last week with my whip team on USMCA to be ready to put the votes together to pass it once it's finally scheduled for a floor vote, if it's finally scheduled. And it ought to be scheduled for a floor vote. Frankly, it ought to be scheduled by the end of this month, and it would pass Congress. And again, America would have better trade relationships with our friends from the North and South, Canada and Mexico, who both want this to happen. American workers would benefit. Agriculture community, our farmers would benefit. And yet they're all waiting while Pelosi and her most radical left base plays this game of impeachment without any basis for impeachment. So we're going to continue to do our job. In the meantime, as Liz mentioned, her team did a great job of putting on a retreat that included the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and such great engagement from our members to focus on issues that are real important to getting this country back on track, addressing real problems that we're facing. And then in the meantime, we won and swore in 2 new members last night. It was exciting to see both Greg Murphy and Dan Bishop get sworn in as new members of Congress from North Carolina last night. And after they voted, the very first act as members of Congress that they took was to sign the Born Alive discharge petition, bringing that count to 203 members of Congress who have signed the discharge petition. Only 15 left to go, and that bill will come to the floor and pass if 15 more Democrats sign it. So I want to commend both of them. Congratulate them, of course, for getting sworn in, but commend them for signing the discharge petition on Born Alive. And we're going to keep doing our work as Nancy Pelosi is focused on this bizarre concept of winning campaigns that results in a lost election. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm more than happy to encourage her to keep focusing on that while we focus on delivering results for families and then ultimately winning this majority back so we can actually do real things with it that matter to families as opposed to wasting it all on this witch hunt impeachment hoax that they continue to go down. With that now, our Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Good morning. One thing the Whip did not tell you about was the little side wager we had on a little football game this weekend. It's not the first time I won in that wager. It's the second, but it's all good. And we hope Drew Brees quick recovery. As they spoke about, we did have a retreat, and what we watched, it was a very good retreat on the policies and others. But one thing that we saw around the world that everybody else, another terrorist attack from Iran, hitting a critical oil facility in Saudi Arabia, affecting more than 5% of the world production. Thankfully, in the last decade, America has changed the course. That we can become energy independent, but also that the Republicans lifted the export ban to more than 30 countries. But what Iran has done and continue to show cannot go unanswered. The president took the first action today by again finding ways to raise sanctions. But the world needs to come together. This cannot stand. Again, to show why Iran should never be able to have a nuclear weapon. What would they do with it? How would they act? And they are not an individual country that wants to work with others. I think this is a time that the world unites to stop these terrorist actions and stop Iran from harassing the rest of the world. We watched what is happening here back home. As many have announced, yes, we did swear in 2 new members. Yes, the Speaker of the House answer to losing an election was she won a campaign, just lost an election. It seems the same as this imaginary impeachment. When I watched the hearing yesterday, something interesting happened. I hope you all followed it. That the Democrats actually changed the rules of their committee. They changed the rules to have political consultants and donors to come in and ask the questions. Unheard of. I've actually heard from Democrats begin to wonder if Nadler should stay as chairman of that committee. He campaigned just on the fact, not about what he could achieve policy-wise, but he would be the very best chairman for impeachment. But his own majority leader that manages the committees said it wasn't impeachment. The Speaker of the House actually refused to answer any more questions to you in her press conference. When you watch the presidential debate for the Democrats, there was not one question on impeachment or the economy. Why? Because the Democrats have even done their own poll, the DCCC. Democrats believe impeachment is the least amount of things they should work on. But when you ask Democrats, what has this new socialist democratic majority achieved? All they can tell you is the majority is investigations. But they can't name one issue that they have solved. They have wasted their majority. And they're allowing a chairman who does not know how to run a committee to create an imaginary impeachment. To now bring in donors and political consultants to ask the questions. To say he doesn't have enough time to deal with the border. He doesn't have enough time to bring in an inspector general that just investigated the DOJ to actually learn what is going on. But he's going to continue to follow the path that the majority of Americans believe nothing should go happen in. That is why Democrats begin to wonder, should he stay as chairman? I will tell you, just by the way he runs the committee, he would not stay as a chairman on our side of the aisle. When I look to what we can be pursuing, today we'll have one series of votes on a Wednesday. One series of votes on a Wednesday. We'll bring up maybe one bill by the end of the week, when we have United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. Something that Mexico has already ratified, something that Canada is waiting on us to make happen. And at the very minimum, 180,000 Americans are waiting for a new job. We're poised to continue our conversation with China to get a level playing field. It looks as though November might be the time of those discussions. Wouldn't America be stronger if we had the USMCA done before November? I'm not sure what the holdup is. The Speaker says she's working towards it. I would hate to win the campaign on USMCA, but not have the election. This would pass if it comes to the floor. I think at a moment of time, the Democrats should have a conference. They ought to look at what the American people have said. They ought to watch what the presidential campaign asks questions about. And they ought to put politics aside. Stop worrying about tearing down the president and start focusing on building up this country. USMCA will pass if it comes to the floor. We have plenty of time in floor debate to make it happen. We know we'll be stronger. Just last month, you know who our largest trader is? Mexico. You know who's number 2? Canada. China's number 3. Would we not be stronger if we even strengthen our number 1 and number 2 traders? Would we not make America stronger? But no, we'll begin to focus and let Nadler try to run an imaginary impeachment and an issue that his own party says is the least importance. And all those running for president never even get a question about. I begin to wonder, or I guess it answers the question, why did the Democrats want the majority? They never told the American people what they wanted, so I guess they just wanted to do nothing. They're achieving that goal. Questions? Yes, sir.
So the president's wrapping up a visit to California today. One thing that he's talked about a little bit is the homelessness issue there.
Yes. And it will be the very top issue in California today.
So the Council of Economic Advisors says that California has about a 12th of the country's population, but 50% of the nation's unsheltered homeless. Your district in Kern County reported a 50% increase earlier this year. Have about 1,400 people that are homeless there. I mean, he's been really critical of California's leaders.
He should be.
This issue, and I'm wondering what you think the administration should do, and whether you've had any direct discussions with the president on it.
I've had a lot of direct discussions with the president on it because the rise of homelessness in California drives directly from the Democrats themselves. The passage of Prop 47, decriminalizing of drugs, and the Prop 53, allowing people out of prison. What we found is I had a symposium on homelessness just in the last couple of weeks, where I brought city, county governments, all the nonprofits, and the faith community together, because even in Bakersfield, it's become the number 1 issue. I brought our law enforcement in and others. You know who else I brought? The mayor of San Diego, Kevin Faulconer. Because when you study the homelessness in California, you'll see an increase in San Francisco where they're now actually losing conventions just based upon the homelessness and the needles and the dirt and the drugs and the human waste that is on the streets. Or when you look to LA, where you're now having diseases that we have not had in 50 years, the rise in those two cities. But look to San Diego. How have they managed? A decrease in the homelessness. So Kevin Faulconer came up, and he met with my community. And how did Kevin handle it? Much different than the Democrats. He took a policy where he put three tents together, the veterans, homelessness with children, and the singles. But he wrapped it around with health care and jobs. He was fighting the crisis of what the Democrats have been doing. It's actually decreased in San Diego. It shows the contrast between a Republican belief and a Democrat belief. It shows a contrast to solving a problem instead of making a problem worse. The Democrats just asked for more money, but they made something which you watch throughout these tent cities. If you analyze the homelessness, 51% of them in my community because of drug treatment. They're addicted. 27% come in with mental illness. But we cannot even help an individual get treatment off the streets because of the way the law is written. We have a jail that is empty. They know they can steal up to about $950 and they do it, where they could actually get treatment. But after this symposium and after Kevin Faulconer came in, I'm proud to say my community acted. We got the city and county working together, where we got a temporary housing unit brought up. We've got the hospitals for a wraparound, and now we could actually take people off the streets to provide them the care. But that's not the case in New York and San Francisco. The other problem why you have homelessness, affordability. Every new regulation has made California less affordable. The ability to sustain yourself. The high taxes, where we continue to see you are correct, is 12% of the nation's population, but we have more than half of the homelessness, as you stated. Then we have a governor who comes out with a very bold statement that he's going to provide free health care to any illegal person who comes to California. But will he treat the veterans who are homeless on the streets? It is a backward policy that has created the problems from affordability to homelessness and others. I am thankful that the president went to California. I'm thankful that the president is calling this out. And I'm thankful that we have people who have a common sense conservative view like Kevin Faulconer and shows a way to solve this problem. And that's what we're doing in Bakersfield as well. Yes.
I have another California-related question.
Yes.
The Trump administration is expected to revoke the waiver, the clean air waiver, regarding vehicle emissions. I'm curious as to what your response is to that. I know that the governor is not thrilled with that decision, so I'm curious.
I have not seen what's coming forward. We'll have to wait to see what's coming forward. I would hope the California governor would work with the president. I do not believe it makes sense to have two different standards out there. And you can deal and have clean air at the same time have economic growth. And I think that's the way that we should look at working together. Instead of the governor going out and signing a bill about whether changing the federal law that you have to give out your tax returns to run for president, I think he should have focused and sat down with the president and have one standard for all of America. One, the car industry will be stronger, the air will be cleaner, and economically we'll be able to grow. Put your politics aside, solve a problem, and work together. There's no need for more ideas of just having a press release. Why don't you come down and sit down with the president and his team? Because I was with both those individuals, and I know at the same time we could work together. There just has to be a willingness on California's side. It seems as though California is more wanting just to say no to anything the federal government wants to do instead of sitting down and find out where we find common ground. If I look to true leadership, I would look to a governor that would sit down instead of a governor that just wants to pick a fight. Yes?
What's the status of continuing resolutions and where the Republicans stand on the House?
Well, like anything, Republicans will first want to read the bill. I know the Democrats are looking and they're putting it together now. We'd like to see, work with them. A continuing resolution, short-term resolution to, I think they're looking at, I haven't seen it posted out, somewhere in November 21st. But the one thing Republicans will always tell you, this is not good for the military, especially in a time of what the world looks like with Iran and others. We think we should be able to write these bills. I would have thought during the 6 weeks we're out during summer, that could have been the time to have done it. That's why we took care of getting the budget agreement, and that's why we agreed to the budget agreement. We do not look to doing continuing resolutions because that only costs you more money in the process. We think we should have these appropriation bills done, and we want to see that happen. Thank you very much.
Can we ask you about the motion to recommit?
The motion to recommit on what? That was a motion to instruct.
Sorry, the motion to instruct the restoring $3.6 billion that the president redirected. Yeah. Yeah, so you guys put that up yesterday. You had 7 Democrats. Were you disappointed in that result?
They're put to oppose the president's policies, but the president's made it clear his goal is to rebuild the military and secure our border. And the Senate has been working on a way to do both in our motion to instruct. We also put on the table a way to do both as well, and they should have supported that. And it was, I think it was a very bad vote for every Democrat who voted no.
So you guys will go to conference though in the NDAA?
That's going to be something we're going to continue to fight for in the final version. There's still a good chance we'll get that. It's good for more security and for our military.
So USMCA, Speaker Pelosi says that the White House hasn't sent the text of a bill yet. Do they have something they could put on the floor?
Ambassador Lighthizer had been negotiating with Speaker Pelosi's team over the various objectives and issues that they had raised to him and the president. And he went through, not just in a letter, he actually sat down with the Speaker's team for weeks to try to find a way to resolve each of the issues, or at least address them. And that's what his response last week was about going through and showing how those items can be achieved. And in the end, whether it's some kind of side agreement, I know Speaker Pelosi's talked about reopening the whole thing, but
would House GOP oppose that?
Mexico's already passed the agreement. Anytime you reopen an agreement, you almost start over because everybody might have additional things they want to put in. We have an agreement that Mexico, the United States, and Canada have reached that is better for American workers, it's better for the American economy, and especially for a lot of our dairy farmers and other people in the agriculture industry. And every day we wait, there are more jobs that we're not creating. And so let's get this done. The president's worked in good faith, and as is Ambassador Lighthizer, to address all of the issues that have been raised. But at some point, we've got to say, are we going to get this done or not? And I would hope that Speaker Pelosi moves to help get our economy, make our economy even stronger.
Was it you that called for it by October 1st?
Well, I know that you've got elections in Canada, and you don't want something that's important to be subject to another country's elections. So let's get it done now where everybody agrees that it's a better deal. It's better than the current NAFTA by all standards. Even labor unions want this. A lot of Democrats want this as well. And I've spoken to many House Democrats.
GOP presser just wrapped.
And we are going to switch you over now to elsewhere in Washington, where the House is holding a hearing on children being held in federal custody. Stay with us.
Is only made more complicated by the relatively short time of children residing in ORR care. Some clinicians told OIG that they were concerned about asking children to revisit their trauma when it was unclear whether the child would be in our care long enough to make progress in addressing their trauma fully. ORR's mission remains to unify children with a suitable sponsor as expeditiously and safely as possible. For this reason, most children do not stay in ORR care for very long. Based on the clinical expertise of the mental health professionals on staff, the focus of mental health services has been to stabilize children and to provide them with a sense of security. However, program staff assess each child's mental health needs and provide additional services as appropriate. ORR is working to provide clinicians with tools to strengthen mental health services. Recently, ORR collaborated with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, or NCTSN, to develop a 4-part webinar series on addressing trauma in UAC. ORR is continuing to work with the NCTSN to develop additional resources. ORR also offers post-release services to some UAC. If a child needs additional mental health services after they leave ORR care, a post-release service is child and the sponsor to find services in their community. ORR is working to expand the number of UAC that receive post-release services. I believe that a child should not remain in ORR care any longer than the time needed to find an appropriate sponsor for the child. A central part of ORR's mission is to discharge children from our care as quickly as possible while still ensuring the safety of the child. At the time that OIG conducted its visits, the average length of care was 83 days. It is now 50 days, a 40% reduction. ORR will continue to assess the efficiency of its operations to improve the process for release and reduce the time that a child remains in our care and custody. My top priority and that of my team is the safety and well-being of the children in the temporary care of HHS. We welcome this report because it explained the services that ORR currently provides and identified the obstacles that we face in providing those services. My team is ready to face those obstacles and overcome them with help from our partners and with the continued support of Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our important work. Commander White and I will be happy to answer any questions that you and your committee may have. Thank you, Chair DeLauro.
Thank you very, very much. Let's get right to the questions here. Ms. Maxwell, you note that the policies that traumatize these children have largely been reversed. And I just pick up your quote at the end of your remarks. But you say that facilities still face challenges addressing the trauma of separated kids, and that we ought to pay attention to that and to the deteriorating mental health of the kids who remain in care. The policies have been reversed. What are still the challenges, and what are the policies that ought to be examined going forward?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to clarify that point. Yes, the additional challenges that facilities faced in 2018 continue to be a concern despite some of the policy reversals. First of all, facilities continue to provide care for separated children. So the court order, as you mentioned, that stopped most separations, allows for separations under certain conditions.
There are separations. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and the federal government recently certified to the court that there were 911 children separated from a parent over the last year. In addition, with respect to lengths of stay, ORR did reverse the additional sponsor screening requirements, and the length of stay fell. However, they continue to share information about sponsors with DHS according to the 2016 MOA. And again, as you mentioned, there are concerns that that has a chilling effect on finding sponsors, which is why we recommend that ORR review all of its current policies to see if they present any unnecessary barriers to releasing children to appropriate sponsors and adjust them as necessary.
Thank you for the clarity on that issue. Let me move to Exhibit 2 on page 12 of the report. Shows how the number of young children referred to ORR sharply increased as a result of family separation. And I want to put this information into the record. ORR facilities typically serve teenagers. So answer to this question. Did facilities and grantees have the right tools to adequately provide mental health services for younger children?
Not according to this clinical staff that we spoke to. They told us that they, as Director Hayes had mentioned, that they expressed their concerns about being able to treat children who had encountered intense trauma before coming into care. Now, this is a concern they had in terms of treating all children. They noted it was additionally challenging treating younger children who had different needs and different therapeutic needs and had less attention span. So we recommend, again, that ORR help these facilities, help the clinicians by identifying and disseminating evidence-based, trauma-informed short-term therapy for children of all ages.
Thank you. Commander White, earlier the subcommittee held a hearing with Dr. Althus Stewart, who's president of the American Psychiatric Association, told us about toxic stress. Highly stressful experiences like separation of children from their family is resulting in toxic stress can cause irreparable harm. I respect the testimony that I've heard that you have provided in previous hearings and the warnings that you gave to HHS officials about the traumatic impacts of family separation and the effect on children. Let me just ask you, with your medical background, with what you know about the children who end up in ORR's care, what can you tell us about toxic stress that affects these children as a result of the trauma they've experienced in their countries of origin, during the journeys to the United States, and as a result of family separation?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, to be clear, the UAC program has long been trauma-informed and is designed to serve unaccompanied children. That is an enormous challenge. It is an enormous challenge, but it is dwarfed by the unique challenge of separated children. And as I've testified in front of other committees, and I will say again today, it is, in my professional judgment, impossible to build a program that can respond appropriately to the needs of separated children. The only way to address that trauma is prevention. And this speaks to the need for a coherent legislative fix to define those conditions under which it is permissible to separate a child from a parent at the border, to have appropriate rights and remedies for parents who experience that. The UAC program is the right place for children who enter the United States unaccompanied, but neither it nor any other federal program I could imagine can respond to the recentness, the severity, the toxicity of the trauma of separation from parents, particularly when the clinicians themselves will be seen by the children as part of the very system that separated them.
Thank you. I am going to go for this last comment here. You have Exhibit 3, page 13 of the report. Length of stay in ORR custody spiked after HHS signed the MOA with DHS. So, Ms. Maxwell, according to the mental health clinicians your investigators interviewed, what are the mental health effects on children staying in ORR custody longer as a result of the memorandum of agreement?
What we heard from clinicians in the field were that children who did not initially exhibit mental health or behavioral issues began reacting negatively the longer their stay wore on.
So the longer children stay in care, the longer they are traumatized. Let me make a final comment here. As long as the MOA is still in place, there are sponsors who are terrified of coming forward. It was at our July hearing, Assistant Secretary Johnson agreed that HHS should be terminated. As long as this MOA is in place, HHS is unnecessarily extending ORR custody for children, which further traumatizes them. The MOA must be rescinded.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ms. Maxwell, let me start with you, if I may. You had some really valuable, I think, and very helpful information on the damage done in terms of family separation to young children. We obviously have a larger population that is unaccompanied, and so they don't go through that. But if you could distinguish, and the last testimony actually probably did a pretty good job of this, but that second population, which we are dealing with in very large numbers, what are the differences that you see between, obviously, family separation, which I think we all agree was a bad mistake, and obviously the more normal situation that we're now dealing with of unaccompanied children? Are they traumatized to the same extent? Or?
Yes, thank you for that question. Our report largely deals with the entire population of children that the OR facilities have to provide mental health care. Most of the challenges that we heard about were, in fact, systemic challenges that affected all the children in care. And we heard again and again that all the children in care suffered, severe trauma in home country during the journey, and that some children experienced the additional trauma of unexpectedly being separated from their parents. But as we move forward with our recommendations on practical steps that OR can take to address these systemic challenges, we have designed them such that they would help improve the mental health care for all the children that OR facilities are responsible for caring for.
Thank you. Director Hayes, could you give me some idea of the steps that you've taken to respond to some of the suggestions and recommendations that the IG has placed in front of you?
Yes, sir, Congressman. Happy to. So, again, we are working on a number of things in response to the OIG's report. We already are working on developing an intern program with colleges and universities in order to place interested students in ORR programs with hopes that they will one day come and join us as professionals postgraduate. Additional funding for continuing education to licensed clinicians as a retention strategy is also something that we're undertaking. We're working to expand our presence at job fairs across the nation in order to find needed clinicians and case managers to work in our facilities, although I will note that a number of those job fairs have been protested and some of the staff potential staff verbally threatened, and so that is not helpful. We've also partnered with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, the NCTSN, to develop a 4-part webinar series, as I referenced in my testimony, on trauma in the UAC. And in April of 2019, we also hired a board-certified adolescent and adult psychiatrist that is employed inside of the Division of Health of Unaccompanied Children at ORR.
Well, I commend you for those steps. I'm going to go back very quickly to Ms. Maxwell. Do you have a mechanism to follow up? I think there's a good faith effort going on at ORR to try and respond. But it's important, obviously, that we have, as you provided us, sort of an outside view to make sure that process continues.
Absolutely. Thank you. We are happy to see the steps that OR has already committed to, some of which they've already undertaken. So that's a good start. But yes, our process is to always follow up the recommendations and be in conversation with the department to ensure that all of the commitments that they made are fulfilled and are fulfilled to sort of the spirit of the recommendation as well. So we will continue to work with the department to make sure.
And I hope you stay, as I know you will, stay in touch with this committee because obviously at the end of the day we've got a resource requirement here. Let me go back to you, if I may, Director Hayes. It's got to be extraordinarily difficult to get the personnel you need. We know that, as I mentioned earlier, just in terms of mental health for the entire population. In this case, you need bilingual professionals, I would suspect, in many cases. There can't be a ton of those, particularly in a lot of the areas that you have your shelters. So, I mean, number one, what are you doing? What level of success are you having?
So thank you, Congressman. Yes, to your point, the Flores Settlement Agreement does require the majority of our shelters to be in the area where the majority of the children are apprehended, Southeast Texas, the Northeast Corridor, Southern Florida, and Southern California. And so, there is a challenge in those areas to identify and retain, some of the licensed clinicians that we need. We are looking to expand outside of some of those areas. We worked very closely with keeping the committee staff informed on our efforts to look into larger metropolitan areas where we can have some of these smaller and medium-sized shelters, and hopefully tap into a fresh pool of clinician staff, although we are seeing some resistance to that, even right here in our own backyard in D.C. and Northern Virginia. Again, at the expressed desire of Congress to open up more smaller and medium-sized shelters that are licensed, we're seeking to do that and not really receiving a lot of support, actually opposition by both D.C. and Northern Virginia. So we'll continue to look in other areas and expand outside of that where we can pull, from the local community the needed licensed clinicians and case managers and youth care workers and other support staff that we need.
Thank you very much. As I advise you, Madam Chair, I'm going to have to step out, but I will be back. So,
Chairman Lowy.
I, too, want to apologize. I am called to another hearing. I just wanted to thank you all for your thoughtful comments, and particularly Jonathan White when you talked about the severity toxicity, separation of children. And I just want to read this quote again because as a mother of 3, grandmother of 8, I can't imagine that these children who were brought here by their parents for whatever reason are being separated. So, if the New York Times is saying, since the president officially ended family separations, authorities have removed more than 900 children from their families. More than half of the children, 481, were under the age of 10 at the time of separation. 185 of those were under the age of 5. the administration is still doing family separation under the guise that they are protecting children from their parents, even though the criminal history they are citing is either wrong or shockingly minor. So I want to thank the chair for having this hearing again. Thank you for your good work and trying to do the right thing, but this policy is outrageous, and I do hope that we can all work together to change it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Congressman Harris.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair, for calling the hearing, about, caring mental health care. So I need to ask, and I don't know, I guess maybe I'm going to read it there, Commander White. That's right. Yeah, it's not on there, but it's on your arm. Oh, it's in small print. I'm too old to read that far. You're a licensed clinical social worker. You understand the lack of mental health professional availability in the United States. In fact, as the ranking member had said, according to, I believe it's a HHS report, they designated shortage. There are 111 million Americans who live in shortage areas, designated shortage areas. 60% are in rural areas. My district is largely rural areas. So I'm going to estimate that I have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who live without adequate mental health coverage. Is that something that you appreciate? That there are a lot of Americans who don't have adequate mental health care?
Congressman, there's no doubt that nationwide, all of the evidence that we have and everything that our department has produced for many years affirms there is not enough mental health workforce. There's also particular deficiencies from many geographic areas. And in the case of the children we serve, there are also additional challenges both for those children and for anyone who needs culturally and linguistically appropriate services that those with mental health needs from Central America would have. These are national problems. They're amplified for us because these children are a federal responsibility. But this is a giant problem.
Sure, but as policymakers, we always have to balance. When we have a limited resource like health professionals, where are we putting them now? It says, I guess, in the IG's report that, and I guess this is true, ORR requires each facility employ at least one mental health clinician for every 12 children in care, a ratio of 1 to 12.
That is correct.
Wow. In Baltimore City, remember, where there's one murder a day, where I'll bet you almost every student knows someone who's been killed or some family who's had a murder a day, the ratio of counselors in schools, mental health counselors to students, is 980 to 1. 12 to 1 sounds pretty good. How are we at getting to that goal? Because I don't know. You must be doing tremendous recruiting, because we can't recruit into inner cities in Maryland where we have students who unquestionably have the need for mental health care, unquestionably. So where does 12 to 1 come from? Because it seems like it's a pretty low ratio compared to the 980 to 1 that are in Baltimore City schools, and the 250 to 1, which is recommended nationwide for school counselors. And again, Baltimore City has more problems. These children are exposed to trauma every day on their streets. It's a lawless environment. The president is absolutely right about Baltimore. Where does the 12 to 1 ratio come from?
Dr. Harris, the ratios of 1 to 12 for clinicians, 1 to 8 for youth care workers, and 1 to 8 for case managers is inside the ORR policies and procedures. Perhaps my colleague, Commander White, can speak to some of the historicity behind that, but that's specifically spelled out in our policies.
And you hit that ratio? You do have a 12 to 1 ratio?
We do, yes, sir.
Congratulations, because it's much better. Much better mental health care than exists in other high-risk populations, again, like Baltimore City. Schools, students. There are two categories of children who ORR takes care of, general categories. Ones who have been separated by their parents because they're unaccompanied children. Some relative of theirs decided to send this child across a trek to I don't know, can't call it self-separation because these children had nothing to do with it. And then you have the family separation that occurred at the border under laws. What's the ratio? What's the highest it's been, and what is that now? Of those two, I'll call them patient groups. I'm a doc. Patient groups.
So, Congressman, I don't have the specific numbers. We'll be happy to work with your team to, to get the specifics out. But I can state, the overwhelming majority of the children that are in our care, the absolute overwhelming majority, are not children that we considered separated by law, meaning they came across the border either unaccompanied or with someone other than a mom, dad, or
the overwhelming majority. So, how do I explain to the people in my district who don't have mental health care that we have a 12-to-1 ratio in these facilities when the vast majority of children are there because their parents chose to separate them or their relative chose to separate them, and I don't have it? And that's a rhetorical question. You're not going to answer that. I tell you, 12-to-1 ratio is great. I congratulate you on being able to find those professionals because we can't do it in my district. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Congresswoman Roybal Allard.
For a long time, one of the things that has troubled me is the overuse of psychotropic drugs in our foster care system. So when I read press reports indicating forced use of these drugs in OR custody children, I found it to be extremely disturbing. And while the OIG report showed the percentage of children in OR custody who had been prescribed psychotropic medications was lower than in the general population, there are still 300 or more children currently prescribed medications that can have significant impacts on their psychological development without any family involvement or consent. Ms. Maxwell, what percentage of the children reported to be taking these psychotropic medications in your report came into OR custody already on these medications? And did your report quantify how many of the children receiving psychotropic medications were taking 2 or more medications?
Thank you for that question. We do not have those specifics. So we were talking to their case managers and the medical coordinators that prescribe those medications, and we have the statistics about who was taking medications in care. And as you mentioned, it was about 1 in 30, about 300 children in the 45 facilities we visited were on those drugs.
Okay. Commander White, I think this is a very serious issue, particularly in terms of follow-up children who are on these drugs and then are released. It can have serious consequences if they aren't monitored and either continue with the medication or are brought down from it. Since OIG did not independently review the medical records or assess the appropriateness of the medications that were prescribed for these children, who would be the proper person or agency to go and make these reviews?
In just a moment, I'm actually defer to Mr. Hayes as the director because policies have evolved since I left ORR. But within ORR, there is a team of the Division of Health for Unaccompanied Children. They are career public health service officers like myself. They are board-certified pediatricians, epidemiologists, pediatric psychiatrists, and nurses. And the supervisory role for the medical care of children, and also the processes whereby children are discharged with a plan for continuity of care is ultimately their responsibility. But I'll defer to Mr. Hayes to talk about the current policy.
Yes, so Commander White answered that question accurately, ma'am. That's how I would have answered it as well. And I'll just state that when I became the acting director at the very end of 2018, I delegated those medical type decisions to our deputy director over children's programs and her medical team as the both medical and child welfare experts.
And so how often does that person review the medical records of these children to make sure that they are prescribing the appropriate amount, and when the children are released, that their follow-up records are also appropriately done?
Yes, ma'am. So, Congresswoman, specific to medication prescribed, I don't have details into that. Again, that's something I would defer to the, to our medical doctors on staff. But I would say that the professionals that Commander White mentioned, that is an ongoing daily discussion across a myriad of issues with all of the medical professionals at each of our shelters, a coordination effort back and forth with the Division of Health of Unaccompanied Children here in D.C. So it's an ongoing process.
Okay, so when a child is released, then does that medical expert then review the record and the plan for that child when that child is released? On a case-by-case basis?
Particularly for minors who have higher acuity medical needs, including higher acuity behavioral health needs like you're talking about, it would be standard to have a member of that team work with the treating physician and treating medical team in the child's program on a plan for effective transition for continuity of care as the child exits the program. That's ultimately bounded by the realities of what kinds of care actually exist out in the community, which is something we don't control, but absolutely yes, that is a very high priority for physicians on that team.
And if I just may add, Congresswoman, that could be a situation where if there is a strong medical need, that would be something where our grantee team and our project officers would work for some post-release services to identify some community-based resources, to Commander White's point, again, to ensure that continuity of care.
Okay, and is there, does the insurance, if, say, a sponsor, the release to a sponsor, are those medications covered by insurance? Maybe not every insurance.
So different sponsors will have different degrees of family access to the healthcare system. We in HHS do not fund ongoing access to healthcare. We're not appropriated to fund ongoing access to healthcare for discharged minors. Minors are discharged with a supply of medication, a referral to services in the community, and part of the case management plan with the sponsor and the child is to identify how they will get those needs met in the future. But the broader healthcare system is as it is.
Okay, and I'm over. Okay. Okay, I've got plenty of questions.
Congressman Molinar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you for having this hearing, and I want to welcome all our guests, and I wanted to thank you also for reappearing before the committee and participating in this way. I wanted to just build on some of the discussion that has already occurred on the, the health professional shortage areas. Obviously, we're concerned about people getting good access to mental health services. And, of course, these children, given what they've been through, would want to really make sure they are well served. And the ratios that we were talking about, as some of our colleagues have mentioned, it's a challenge all over the country. And my hope is that ORR has been working with colleagues in HHS to kind of look at what we're learning on a national scale and applying it to this situation as well in order to, expand these resources and make the most. One area, and just in context of my district, is in rural Michigan. We actually have 62 health performance professional shortage areas, which is pretty significant. So we're dealing with this in rural Michigan. A couple of things we're looking at is, kind of innovative ways to partner with state, federal, and local agencies to maximize the resources. Another thing we're looking at is telemedicine and, technology where, people don't have to travel great distances and you're able to act. Have you looked in this situation at the use of telemedicine, where it may be beneficial, where it wouldn't be helpful? Because I'm viewing that as a tremendous way of giving people the resources they need and specified treatment. But I want to get your perspective on, what the potential is for that.
So I don't have specific numbers, Congressman, but I will say that we do utilize some telemedicine practices inside some of our shelters to help, meet some of the ratios that are required. So. And
do you feel that, I know it requires technology, it requires, in our case, rural broadband access in every area. But what strikes me is you're talking people who speak different languages, people who have different cultural, and the idea that you could tailor that and have professionals from all over the country being available to that could be helpful, but I don't know the limits of that.
Well, Congressman, one of the things I pointed out in my testimony, and as did Ms. Maxwell, one of our requirements is that you are a bilingual to be one of our grantee staff, and obviously have just that cultural understanding of, where the children have come for as well. So that's a requirement. So that actually even further narrows the window of licensed clinicians that we have available, again, having to be both meet our educational standards and experience standards, but also be bilingual.
Are there any resources you would need to expand opportunities for telemedicine?
I'm sure there could be some, sir. I don't really have any at the top of my head. Be happy to circle back with you.
Okay, I'd be very interested in that. It's something we're dealing with in rural Michigan, and we're kind of seeing areas where it has tremendous potential, areas where it may not so much, but I think, and the other question I had are you looking at sort of partnerships with states and local entities that could help improve the situation?
So I would say one thing. I'm going to go back to the division director of health for unaccompanied children and ask the telemedicine question, and so we will get back to you on that. Again, sir, my goal and the goal of Assistant Secretary Johnson and Secretary Azar is to increase our permanent network capacity so that we have available permanent state licensed beds for all of the children that are referred to us from our federal partners. And to that end, that requires a partnership with the local and state governments. And we welcome local and state governments to partner with us in this mission to care for these very vulnerable children. And again, we're seeing some resistance to that with certain communities, and I wish that wasn't so. Because again, we want to be able to have, as directed by Congress and as the expressed desire of the leadership of HHS, as many state licensed permanent beds available to meet the needs of these kids without having to rely on emergency influx beds.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
I'm going to take a prerogative here before I introduce Congressman Pocan. I would just say that if we had a discharge plan that was adequate and moved these children out quickly, as we said earlier, that the longer they're there, the more traumatized they are. It's not about building the capacity for beds. It is about building the capacity in a discharge plan to be able to get them out of the system in a safe place, as the mission has said, expeditiously as possible. Might also add that if you want to increase professionals, increase the reimbursement rates, stop private contracting, and look at some of those issues in terms of increasing professionals, and in terms of the amount of services and the dollars where you can find opportunity for different kinds of services for the children who are there, including mental health services. We just appropriated $2.9 billion. There ought to be room in there to be able to fund some of these efforts. Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. This is certainly a sad stain on our nation's history of what's happened with this period, and we're not through it yet. So we appreciate you all being here today. Mr. Hayes, I have a question for you. It's a yes or no. Do you agree that the Trump family separation policy has had a negative impact on your agency's ability to meet its legal mandate to provide mental health care to unaccompanied children? It's a yes or no.
Could you repeat the first part of that, sir? I'm sorry.
Sure. Do you agree that the Trump family separation policy had a negative impact on your agency's ability to meet its legal mandate to provide mental health care to unaccompanied children?
I agree that the separation of young children from their families created a difficult environment at the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which I stepped into in June of last year, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because when we read the report, and I know you've obviously read the report, and hear of things like having to go to a neighboring state for a bilingual specialist. I mean, clearly we know where these kids are coming from. Like, this should have been, it's not even a 101, it's kind of a remedial level of providing assistance to folks. And again, it's very sad that this happened when you hear about a 7 or 8 year old child thinking they're about to be killed because of this policy. You don't get much worse, I think, as far as government policy doing things like this. I have a question just to kind of bring it back. So we all went to Homestead, and we appreciate your time there, and since then coming to the committee. But
to get back to why and some of the conditions that put children in this place, people back home still, to this day, cannot understand how we spend $750 a day to house children for really long periods of time until we made some policy changes recently. And we had 3,000 plus kids at Homestead. When for $750 a day, you could go to Four Seasons, any Trump hotel, which I'm sure he would have enjoyed. The fact that we finally got the children out very quickly just doesn't pass the smell test back home. Why it took so long for so long. People were making a lot of money in a private facility at $750 a day. And then suddenly we're able to move folks. But at the very end, there were a couple hundred kids that were literally in the middle of the night whisked away. Can you address that couple hundred children that in the middle of the night were whisked away on the final day?
Yes, sir. So one thing, I think you referenced a number of well over 3,000. There was
it 2,700 or something?
The highest number was around 2,620. I don't know the exact
2,620.
number.
Okay, 2,620.
That was the highest. I just want to clarify.
Pretty
that.
Disgusting number, nonetheless. Correct.
Well, again, it was based on the numbers of children coming across the border.
Due to the policy that we've all agreed has put us in a pretty awkward place.
These are numbers that started in January of this year and escalated up until June, until when the referrals dropped. And the reason I'm answering that way, Congressman Pocan, is because that was one of the effects on the ability to empty out Homestead, which is the sheer drop in mid-June of referrals coming across the border.
Well, just because one of the girls I talked to, she had been there 60 days before, the week before they finally reached out to her brother. So for 50-some days, a company made a lot of money not doing their job, which was to try to place that person outside. And again, when I tell that story back home, people can't understand it. But the 200 people whisked away, I'm just trying to figure that out because it's something, it's a question for a lot of us.
I asked for the percentage of kind of the last, 30 to 45 days at Homestead. And
the last night, I'm talking about the middle of the night, the last couple hundred.
I answer that, sir.
Yeah.
Well over 80% of the children that were discharged from Homestead were released to their family. Or
right,
sponsors.
that wasn't my question, though. My question was...
But then the ones that were transferred, the roughly 15 to 17%, they were transferred.
What I'm asking for, really specific, please, if you could address that, is we're just wondering, the couple hundred children between 2 and 6 in the morning were taken out of the facility the last day. That's odd, right?
No, it would not be odd, sir, for this reason.
It's not odd. Interesting.
For this reason. If we're going to transfer them to another shelter, which is what we did for medical reasons or because they had no identifiable sponsor in the U.S., we would rely on commercial transportation at times, and that might involve an early morning flight if you're traveling.
So that was what happened the final 200?
That is, again, I don't know every single specifics, but I can guarantee that is most likely what happened. A lot of times our staff will escort these children on very early morning flights.
And is
they arrive at a more appropriate
just because I got 30 seconds. Is Homestead completely empty of children right now?
It is, as of August 3rd.
And what are we spending to keep it empty at this point?
I don't know the exact number, but I do know that we reduced the support capacity from the 2,700 down to just 1,200, and so a lot of the staff were let go.
So are we paying equivalent of 1,200 kids a day to be there, or are we just paying a maintenance? Just trying to get an understanding of what we're spending.
It's a fully active shelter at this time with the ability to take.
So we're spending $750 a day on 1,200 imaginary people?
It's not 750, but yes, sir, we are.
What is the total then, just so I get it?
I think it's about 600.
$600 a day.
We are.
For 1,200 invisible, imaginary, non-existent human beings at Homestead now,
it's the
every
beds,
single day.
It's the beds, but yes, sir, to keep them.
But why 1,200 if we have no one there? Couldn't we say 100 people that aren't there?
100 kids or
imaginary people? There's imaginary people there right now. There's no one there, but you're spending. Again, I have to explain back home. Even $600 a day, you're still at the Four Seasons or the Trump Hotel. Why we're spending that much, but now not to even have a child not getting mental health care. This is not to even have anyone stay there.
Congressman, I think one thing you and I can agree on is that this is a very expensive program to operate. If that's the point you're trying to make, I would agree with that. I will just state that if we remove the staff at Homestead, what I was told by my planning and logistics team and the senior career professionals at ORR, you're looking at a minimum of 90 to 120 days in order to reactivate the staff back for that. And again, given the extreme uncertainty of referrals coming across our nation's southern border and how many kids we might have to care for, that wasn't really a switch that we were ready to turn off at this point.
But some of that referrals is caused by the president's policies. My time is out, so I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Congresswoman Bustos.
Thank you, Chairwoman DeLauro, and thanks for holding this hearing and for the points that you've made. Thanks to the Office of Inspector General for taking a look at this. The three of us were having these little side conversations up here. Congresswoman Frankel to my left, who has a grandson who's less than a year old. Congresswoman Watson Coleman, who has a grandson who's 6 years old, a granddaughter who's 6 years old. I've got 2 grandkids myself, and we are all just up here listening to these words: hopelessness, feelings of abandonment, fear, severe trauma. And we're all picturing our own grandchildren being in these situations, and we are just heartbroken. And when we look at this report, and every page we turn, just heartbreaking. And I don't care who is in the White House. I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. And I don't care who's sitting up here, whether we're Democrats or Republican. This is just heartbreaking to listen to this. Commander White, I was looking at your bio. You're a PhD licensed clinical social worker, a career officer with the U.S. Public Health Service. Have you gone to these facilities and seen what's going on there? And I want to get like this. And have you also, Ms. Maxwell, have you seen this up close and personal?
Congresswoman, I was the senior career official over the UAC program previously, and prior to that, going back to 2012, I've been the emergency management official used in every one of the influx crises. I know these programs and their services pretty well from firsthand. I've also been in 2014 in the border stations, and I know what it is when we don't have bed capacity available for children in time. And that is the other part of the story that's also very important when we talk about beds not being used. And yes, I have seen these programs and know them well. Yes, ma'am.
So if maybe you could talk us through, when it's not a visit that has been pre-planned, and as I think it was Congresswoman DeLauro was saying, that you walk in and you see smiling kids when this is a planned visit by members of Congress. What do you see? Tell us what you're seeing. And then my other follow-up question to that, because we get our full 5 minutes here, which is never enough time to have a decent conversation about all this. What are the long-term consequences of the kids who are living through the severe trauma, the angry feelings, the anxiousness? What are we going to see when these children are teenagers? And what are we going to see in our society as a result of what the government has done to these children?
So what you see when you're in a program on a regular day without members of the United States Congress there is not, in my experience, very different from what you see on a tour, except that the staff are much more nervous when there are members of Congress there. The children that you see and the environments in which you encounter them are what you would also see in domestic congregate child welfare settings licensed by the state, because that's what they are. The children, when you, as you talk to them and work with them, represent a range of experiences. Many of them have sustained extraordinary histories of trauma in home country, in transit, and in some cases in the United States. Separated children are intrinsically different, however, in that the traumas they have sustained are both extraordinarily severe and they are currently ongoing. And we are part of that traumatization in the United States government, which is different than being the response to that traumatization. Long term, the consequences of separation for many of these children will be lifelong. It will involve both behavioral and physical health harm, that all the best available evidence we have on trauma and toxic stress, including that focuses on children separated from their parents, would suggest will be both severe and very difficult to manage even with high levels of clinical care.
And all this could be prevented if the United States government in this administration didn't have these kind of policies that is allowing these children to go through this kind of trauma.
Separation other than for strict cause is preventable. However, Congress has not passed legislation of any kind to define the conditions under which separation may occur. And as I've asked previous committees, I will say again, that is a gap in law. And it is one that this Congress could, and I would submit should, address.
Okay, I'm down to 3 seconds. So thank you for those answers. Appreciate it. I yield back.
Congresswoman Frankel.
Thank you. Okay. My little sponge here fell off. Okay. You can hear me? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, really. And, I really can tell from your expressions and what you're saying that all of you are very sincere about trying to correct a very terrible situation, which I know none of you really caused. But I just want to echo, before I ask my questions, what my colleague here, Ms. Busa, said, because I'm a new grandmother, and when I just think of what's the brutal, cruel policy of taking children from their parents, and to me, this is just government child abuse. It's child abuse. I want to start because I want to emphasize what Representative DeLauro has been talking about, which is the agreement with HHS, where HHS has agreed to share personal information of potential sponsors with agencies that can actually go to a home and perhaps seize an undocumented citizen. And I think what we experienced when we were at the homestead, we all went to the homestead facility, is that one of the feelings that we got is that one of the big reasons for the delay in getting these children back with with any member of the family, but was because of the fear that by giving a enforcement agency the ability to go to a home and then pick up an undocumented citizen. And so, Mr. Hayes, I just want to know whether or not, what, if anything, are you doing about trying to get this agreement rescinded?
So I just would say one thing, actually, to correct Commander White. I don't believe the staff at the facility in your district was scared of you. I think they actually would look forward to you coming through the shelter, ma'am.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
They even had your picture up on the wall. So, I think one thing is clear. I think there's some confusion around the information that is shared. I think it's important. I noted this on the tour at Homestead. And as well at my last testimony here, is that going back to 2004, every time a UAC is discharged from ORR, they then go to the jurisdiction of the Department of Homeland Security, and that discharge notification form does go to DHS with the sponsor's information and the child, because it then falls on DHS and Department of Justice to keep them apprised of their court proceedings. So I just think that's...
I understand that. But okay, so with that, because I have some more questions. Yes, but here's the point we're trying to make, is that process is keeping children and families separated. Next question.
May I?
Wait, can I?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I want to ask another question. There's a new policy, I understand, that the president has put in place that now prohibits people seeking asylum to come into the country, so they get stuck in Mexico. Is that correct? Is that going to affect the number of the undocumented children coming into the country?
I think the impact is unknown. There's a couple of things that are ongoing with some of the asylum laws. And again, HHS is not an immigration enforcement agency. I know we did issue a Dear Colleague letter where certain components of that we don't believe will impact the folks that are eligible to come into OR care, both on the refugee resettlement side and
they have to come into the country first, right? Is it going to be hard? It will be hard. The reason I ask this question, because Mr. Pocan asked about spending a lot of money on invisible people. I'm just wondering, are you actually expecting more undocumented individuals to get in here, given the new policy?
Right. While I will acknowledge that the chairwoman is correct, our referral numbers are low, but if historical trends, and I would yield to Commander White here in a second as well, but if historical trends hold true, the expectation should be that as we move into these cooler months, there's a pretty significant chance that the referrals will increase, and most certainly as we get further into November and December, an even greater chance.
I did just want to say this, and I'll keep this brief out of respect for you, ma'am. Every influx crisis in the history of this program, and in fairness, I have been deeply involved in response to all of them, so I have some experience to speak from. Every one of them was preceded by a period of reduced referral and pressure to reduce capacity or stop expanding capacity. And I have asked colleagues on the career side, on the appointed side, and I will now ask Congress, can we please not make this mistake again of thinking every time it goes down that that's like the future? This is an oscillating, highly volatile system, and the best way to keep children off the floors of border stations is to not react when there's a downturn and say, oh, look, that's the end of migration highs.
And that is going to do it for us today at Fox 29's News Now. Be sure to catch us again tomorrow at the same time, 10 a.m., and follow us at fox29.com, as well as our mobile app and across social media. And thank you for joining us this morning.